Hey guys, iKailaKai here, and today is release day of EV04. Wait, you already saw this intro, but let's bring you down another timeline, because at the end of this little travel montage, you may have noticed that I went to another card shop, but I only came back with one box. So what did I do in this card shop? Well, I decided to go buy a couple of cards because tomorrow I have a flagship battle, and I wanted to bring something weird. Now, cope decks have always been in my veins. Maybe if you've been watching me recently, you only know me for Blue Purple Luffy and Black Imu, but in the past, I've topped with Green Black Perona twice actually. Green Kid, Rebecca, Uta. It's a lot of green decks, isn't it? And recently I've been having a little bit of fatigue playing Imu, but I do think that Imu is insanely powerful. When you play a deck for half a year, you start to get a little bit bored of it. And for that reason, I wanted to try to find something new. In Japan, when a new set comes out, you can't actually use that set in official play for 1 week, whether it's championship events or flagships, but you can use them in locals. However, because I'm going to a flagship event, which is a mid-sized tournament, we unfortunately can't use EV04 yet because it just hasn't been a week yet. So I was really racking my head over, do I really want to bring Imu? Obviously, it's probably going to be one of the last few times I get to play Imu, but I had this deep feeling inside of me that if I brought Imu, I wouldn't do too well. So the deck that I'm going to be bringing tomorrow is Red Green Luffy, which is definitely not the deck that you probably expected me to be playing, but nonetheless, it is the deck that I will be. Obviously, I don't have all of the cards for Red Green Luffy, which is a problem. So I had to go to the card shops to try to find them. The nice thing about Japanese card shops is that you can just walk around and look for all the cards that you need. The prices will vary, but I found all the cards. These are 53 cards, including the leader, just because I bought a couple of cards and realized later on that I probably preferred a different card. And really, this is just going to be a complete Frankenstein deck where I couldn't find all the cards that I exactly needed, so I had to make do with what I could find. So this is going to be a deck list that is inspired by ricmasterflash, who's been doing really well in things like the Chili's Cup recently, but it won't be exactly the same, obviously, because I just couldn't find some things like Sabaody Archipelago. So I put my brain to the test, tried to make my deck with the cards that were available to me, and thankfully, because I'm in Japan, I can just walk around and I can find all the cards that I need. Now, of course, I could have went online to make exactly the deck that I wanted, but I wanted to make a little bit of a point with this video. You don't need to have a perfectly optimized perfect deck to do well in the game. As long as you know how your deck works and you understand why you have certain cards within your deck, you can still do really well in tournaments. So rather than opening up your wallet to just buy all the cards that you need, try to first understand exactly why that card is necessary and then evaluate how important it is to the deck as a whole. For example, for Red Green Luffy, a card like 6-cost Luffy is extremely important and I could not play the deck without this card. Same goes for the 5-cost Sanji. However, some more minor cards like which 2Ks or which Searchers I'm using exactly don't change the dynamic of the deck overall, and therefore if I can find a decent substitute, I think that those are perfectly fine. For example, I did see the PRB02 4-cost Zoro on sale, but I was not ready to pay $5 per card just to have a couple more 2Ks in my deck that could easily be substituted with another card. Next, I'm going to run you through my deck card by card, then go over how my matches went on the day, and wrap it up with how I would change the deck going forward now that I've played a couple more games, as well as how I may change it with the full scope of EV04 now that that is out in Japan, because I think that the deck does get some pretty significant and reasonable buffs. For searches, I have 4 Garp, which is just a really great card if your leader is a Saba or Luffy, so just great to have in general. There's also a lot of things that can only be searched by this Garp in this deck. I have 4 Nami, which is just a standard Straw Hat searcher, can also be associated with the 1-cost Red Nami, but I couldn't find that. And the 1-cost Vivi. Now this card, unfortunately, I was trying to find the 1-cost Sabaody Archipelago, which is this card, but I can only find 1 copy. So I bought that 1 copy before I found this Vivi, and when I was talking to my friend, I realized that maybe I could just substitute the Vivi. So the cards that they hit are a little bit different. Vivi does search less targets, but I mean, hey, it has 1K counter, so, you know, we're just vibe building. So this 1-cost Sabaody Archipelago, you know, who needs it? Some places I can find them cheaper, some places I'll find them more expensive. It's also kind of difficult with where I am right now. There just aren't too many card shops, whereas Tokyo just has them everywhere. Another card that I was somewhat lucky to find was the 3-cost Tashigi as well. 3-cost Tashigi is just a generally solid card. It also kind of acts as more copies of the 3-cost Luffy. So just nice card for board protection, though it doesn't actually protect itself, but has 2K counter. Still, this is the only 2K counter that we have in the entire deck, 3 total, which does sound very, very scary, but thanks to your leader effect, you don't need too many, I think. I think that anywhere from 3 to 6 would probably work, but I don't have too many reps on this deck, so I'm not too well versed on what's actually correct. Still, 3 of those for 200 yen. Next, the Luffy, which is just a great card. One of the big issues of this deck is that the 5-cost Sanji is a really, really good card, but because Marcus Mars exists, the Imu matchup is just really, really difficult. So by having this 3-cost Luffy, it's really, really hard to get rid of that Sanji, and on top of that, it actually is an 8K character because this character gives all of your 4-cost or less Straw Hat characters plus 1000 on your turn. So just insanely good card in general, is super searchable as well, being searchable off of all of the searches that we have in the deck as well. And that brings us to another card which is just absurdly powerful in this deck, and that is the 4-cost Nami. This 4-cost Nami is specifically designed for this deck because in most other decks, generally things like Hody or Dead Man's Game would just be better. However, in this deck, it's a 4-cost 2000 blocker, which on play rests 2 of the opponent's 8-cost characters, and at the end of the turn, essentially gives you 10,000 counter. Those 5 dong active, if you have 1 dong on your leader, is going to be extremely relevant. It just makes you so tanky. So that even though you're a 4-life leader with 5,000 power, which in this day and age does feel a little bit iffy, if you're not doing a lot of crazy things in your deck, well, this card is going to be the thing that lets you do a lot of crazy things. And it's not the only of its kind, because there's actually another really good card that was printed in the same set, and that is the 4-cost Usopp. This 4-cost Usopp is rather unassuming, just a 4-cost 5,000, which is a pretty bad stat line all things considered, but at the end of the turn, if your leader is Straw Hat or Film, you get 2 dong active, which for this deck obviously means that you get 4,000 counter at the end of every single turn. So cards like this, the 5-cost Sanji, and the 4-cost Nami in tandem just give yourself a lot of tankiness without actually having to leave up that dong yourself. Rounding out our 4 drops, I have the 4-cost Rodnozoro, which on play restands 2 dong, and at the end of your turn restands himself. This card is just a very good tool to get a little bit of extra hits in, as well as giving you a couple of dong. Restanding your dong on that turn instead of restanding at the end of the turn like Usopp can't actually be relevant, because that dong can be attached to your leader to then activate your leader effect. So while this isn't a repeatable, extremely consistent and powerful combo like Usopp, his attacks are more repeatable because he also restands himself, meaning that he's very tricky to get rid of. This, alongside things like the 3-cost Luffy, means that you're hitting for 6k every single turn instead of just 5k. And those attacks, especially when it's very hard to clear your board, can really start to add up. Now, another card that I added into the deck just because I saw it and just because I thought that it was kind of cool is the 4-cost Luffy. Now, this card's never really seen too much play, but I just like it in general because there's a lot of timings where if you can play it at a really good spot, it can completely mess up the opponent's curve. Blocking one of the opponent's turn can really just throw off their curve, and if you're playing a deck like Mihawk and they were trying to play the 7-cost Shanks on that 7 dong turn, well, this card can probably just single-handedly close out the game. So it's not a card that can be usable in every single scenario, so that's why it's only at 1, but just because I like the card, I wanted to throw it in, and I saw it in the store, so I was like, yeah, why not? Next is a card that was a little bit more expensive than I wanted it to be, and that is the 5-cost Sanji. This card essentially gives you the best of both worlds from the 4-cost Usopp and the 4-cost Zoro. It's a 5-cost 7,000, but on play you can restand 2 dong, and at the end of your turn you get 1 dong back. So it has the immediate benefit like the 4-cost Zoro, and it also has the recurring benefit like the 4-cost Usopp. So really, if you can start to stack these on the board, it can really start to tip the game in your favor. So this is an absolute must-have 4 of, so it is a card that I was willing to pay a little bit more for. Next, the most expensive card in this deck is the 6-cost Luffy. Now, yes, it is technically the most expensive card, but it's still only 480 yen, which is probably about like $3 in America. So sorry about your region, maybe move to Japan, much cheaper to play here. But this card is just amazing. It's a double attack card, which is very rare in the game, which means that you essentially have to counter the attacks or else you're going to be run down very quickly, but also on play you can restand 4 dong. Now granted, you can't play a 5-cost after that, meaning that you can't do something crazy like the 6-cost Luffy into the 5-cost Sanji, but there are so many 4-costs in the deck that it just doesn't really matter. As long as you have that 1 dong on your leader, then whether you're playing the 4-cost Nami, the 4-cost Usopp, or the 4-cost Zoro, all of these targets can be really good for the deck. And so being able to expand your board, or even to just simply use the active dong that you have as counter, is just really nice and makes this deck so tanky, which is why I believe in this deck and hope that tomorrow it's going to serve me well. Now we're on to events, and Luffy has a surprising number of them. The one that you're probably going to be least surprised of is going to be Dead Man's Game. This card is just exceptionally powerful, and that's why it costs 250 yen in Japan, despite just being a simple rare card. But just being able to give your leader plus 3,000 counter, or you can activate the main effect to rest the opponent's dong or blockers, is just really powerful when you're trying to go for lethal, because this deck, while very good at surviving, does tend to struggle to close out the game sometimes. So just having these sorts of options like the 4-cost Nami, like Dead Man's Game and whatnot, to just give you that little bit of edge over the opponent is going to be very nice. Also, just being Straw Hat makes it searchable off of Nami, but unfortunately not searchable off of Vivi, because Vivi only searches 2 costs or higher, which really does suck. The next card, and another card that I absolutely overpaid for, is Charleston. Now this card has basically never seen play anywhere, but specifically works extremely well in this deck, because it's just a simple 2 cost plus 4,000. It's the same as just resting your dong for your leader effect, but by trashing 1 card you can restand 3 dong, essentially meaning that this is a 2 cost plus 10,000. However, do note that Luffy's leader effect does activate before the blocker or counter step, meaning that you can't actually use the dong that you get back from Charleston immediately from your leader effect. You have to use your leader effect first, then use Charleston. Those 3 dong that you get back from your leader effect can only be used on the next attack. Definitely something to keep in mind if you do want to play this deck. Don't get caught up by that, and also don't let someone do that to you if you are playing against someone who's playing Red Green Luffy. But still, just being a essentially 2 cost plus 10,000 counter that can be spread right across the turn is just absurd. So for that reason, even though it's not searchable, it is definitely a 4 within this deck. And next, one of the other surprise cards in this deck is going to be the Gomu Gomu Giganto Pistol, which I don't know what it's called in English at all, but it's just a 3 cost plus 6,000 event to one of your Straw Hat characters. Though they don't become active at the start of the next turn, just having this sudden amount of damage that can come out means that you're going to basically only be using this when you're trying to break through and end out the game. When you're just trying to break through and end the game. And because it's only used in those situations and is also very, very searchable, I just have it at 1 copy, but I mean, ricmasterflash has it at 2 copies, sometimes it at 0, so I think this is kind of just a whatever you want to put in sort of thing. But just having that extra way to close out the game, I think is very, very nice for a deck like this. Which brings us to the last card, which is going to be a card that has recently seen a little bit more popularity, just due to the fact that the characters that people are playing right now in the meta are just really, really big, and that is going to be Round Table. Round Table, just being able to reduce one of the opponent's characters by 10,000 power, is extremely powerful, and it's really easy for Red Green Luffy to actually get back that dunk to be able to use this very easily. The one thing that might shock you though is that this card is run at 4 copies. Because you have so many 1-cost searchers in the deck, that 2,000 power attack is going to be able to deal with any of the opponent's characters, whether they're 12,000 power or less. Just by reducing their power by 10,000, it basically immediately clears anything in the game, making it a pseudo red rock that only costs 4. And for this deck, that's just so powerful, and does feel like the one thing that it needed to be able to not only hold out in the game to get rid of the opponent's bigger attacks, because the bigger attacks are harder to deal with for Red Green Luffy compared to the smaller attack, and in turn give you enough time to actually be able to close out the game with the amount of attacks that you have that are, granted, weaker than the opponent's attacks, but more consistent, and because you're more tanky, hopefully you can get to that point where your attacks actually do end up matter. Still, this is my 50 card list. I will check once again when I decide to sleeve this up if this is actually 50 cards, but I think it should be. But now let's cut to a small montage of me going to the event venue tomorrow. For this tournament, I'm going to the Saga Prefecture, which is about an hour away from where I'm staying. I don't know when I started doing this, but for as long as I can remember, whenever I go to a card tournament, I always go to a nearby shrine, just to pay respects to the local environment that I'm in, and to wish for good luck on the day. A certain Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt that I know taught me that the most important thing when you're going to new environments is to have a routine, so no matter what, I will always go to a shrine before any tournament, big or small. I just finished with the tournament. Obviously, I'm not going to film inside the store out of respect to the people there, but to tell you first and foremost how well I did, I went 4-1. Which is way better than I thought I would do. But because it's a little bit cold outside, let's head home first and then I'll tell you how my matches went. Okay, so this is not filmed quite on the same day because I was a bit tired when I got home, but my matches were as following. Now, flagship battles are generally 5 to 6 rounds. This one happened to be 5 rounds, and I fought against blue-purple Nami, black Imu, green Mihawk, green-purple Lim, and another green Mihawk, only losing to Lim. To start things off, let's talk about the Nami matchup. Now, this matchup, going into it, sounded very, very hard in my head. One of the worst matchups for Red Green Luffy is blue-purple Sanji because he's just so good at consistently removing your deck. And Blue Yellow Nami does do something relatively similar. It's a deck that doesn't necessarily have as much explosive power on the board, but just has very consistent tools to be able to get rid of the opponent's board, while also being able to maintain a very high hand set. In the mid game, I already had 4 round tables in my hand, and Nami, a deck that doesn't necessarily play that many cards to the board, I was thinking that even if she's consistently bouncing cards back to my hand, because I'm getting them back to my hand, I was thinking eventually my board will stick because they'll just eventually run out of things, or they'll be forced to red rock on my cards. The thing that made me change my playstyle was when he used Gravity Blade. The second he used Gravity Blade, I realized that, oh, I'm in a lot of trouble. If I don't have the 3-cost Tashigi, then I can't actually protect my board even with the 3-cost Luffy, just due to the fact that it only protects from KOs. And when this Gravity Blade came out and wiped out all of my relevant attackers on the board, I realized that I didn't have as much time as I expected that I would. Red Green Luffy, a deck that is very good at maintaining pressure, isn't very good at regaining resources. So if my resources run out, then eventually I'm going to lose. And Blue Yellow Nami, a deck that's really good at drawing just so many cards due to the fact that she has things like like the 7-cost Nami with her leader effect, any of the things that let her peel one of her life, or when she just naturally takes one of my life, lets her draw one card. So I knew that if the game went on for too long, I would just end up losing. And so even though I had 4 round tables in my hand, I realized after the second one that the game would not go in my favor if I kept playing that way. So I played out my entire board, tried desperately to make just enough attacks, and just kept hitting the opponent's leader, completely ignoring all the opponent's attacks, hoping that I'd have enough counter through my leader effects to defend them. And thankfully, it was in fact barely enough. If I had pivoted to this plan 1 turn later, I don't think I would have been able to win this game, but identifying that this game would not go in my favor as the game went on was able to let me win. Now, if I were to play this matchup again, I'd be a lot more aggressive from the early game and hold on to my round tables for things like the 8-cost kit or the 10-cost new gate when those come out. But otherwise, I think that this matchup would probably be a lot worse if the game ends up going on for a couple more turns. The other matchup that I was really dreading fighting against was Black Imu, and unfortunately, that's the deck that I hit second. I brought Red Green Luffy hoping to hit into things like Yellow Luffy, Hancock, and Mihawk. Now, I think that actual Red Green Luffy players do find the Imu matchup much better than I actually find it, but for me, I struggle a lot with this matchup just with my lack of practice of the deck. And on top of this, I was given second, so going second into a deck that I'm not very comfortable fighting against as Red Green Luffy felt like a very uphill battle. But rather than talking about the intricacies of the mid game, because I did have a relatively strong curve being able to go the 3-cost Luffy into the 5-cost Sanji, into the 6-cost Luffy, into some 4-cost, it was very difficult to actually close out the game just due to the fact that Imu has so much counter. And generally, if you're fighting against Imu, if they can get to that second 10-cost Gorose or even the third one, the game is almost always going to just be theirs. However, this is probably the first time that I've ever survived 3 10-cost Gorose in a row not playing Imu and actually won. But now let me tell you exactly how I was able to win this game, because it was one of the most difficult lethals that I've ever been able to find before. The opponent has 2 blockers on the field from the 10-cost Gorose, 2 life, and 5 cards in hand. If you've ever been in this situation, you know you're not winning the game against Imu. But I somehow did, and this is exactly how. The turn before, off of the 4-cost Saturn, he searched Never Existed. I had no other knowledge of any of the other cards in his hand, but I knew that one of the 5 cards in hand was an event. I used the Dead Man's Game that I had in my hand to rest his 2 blockers and hit for 7k. He takes this attack, which is a little bit surprising for me, which makes me think maybe I should hit for a little bit higher. But knowing that he has Never Existed, or probably more likely he has many counter events, I decided that instead of hitting at something like 9k that would just get the plus 4k and a 1k, I'm going to hit at 7k again to try to get that plus 4k out of his hand and hope that he just doesn't have any other good counter cards besides that. But off that 7k attack, he counters 2k, 1k. And because he countered that attack, there's no reason for me to go any higher because I still know that he has a Never Existed in hand. So I hit for 7k again. He 2k, 1ks again. So now he has 1 life left and 2 cards in his hand, and I have 3 attacks left on the board. I have my leader as well as the 4-cost Zoro and 3-cost Tashigi that I played the turn before. I hit for 6k because if his 2 cards in his hand is Never Existed and a 1k, he either has to take that attack or he has to burn a plus 4k on a simple 6k attack. Not wanting to use the plus 4k in his hand, he takes the hit. I hit for 6k one more time, and he uses his Never Existed. With my last attack, the 3-cost Tashigi, I attach my last 2 dong, hit for 6k one more time, and it goes through. In the 2 cards that he has left in his hand, he only has 1k counter, meaning that out of a sheer miracle, I was able to find lethal on this turn, bringing me up to 2-0 into a matchup that I was really, really uncomfortable playing against. The third match, I was thinking, finally, I get to go against Mihawk, which is what I wanted to hit on this day. However, I couldn't find round table in the early game, meaning that he was able to set up the 7-cost Shanks and get in a couple of turns with that card to be able to really put a lot of pressure on me. Because I didn't have the means of reducing his aggression, I decided to try to make my board as aggressive as possible, completely ignoring cards on the opponent's board like the 5-cost Currect, although it was locking my 5-cost Sanji, just to be able to get as many hits on the opponent's leader that's 5k power to get that little bit of extra damage on the opponent's leader. He played down the 10-cost Law Beppo, and I didn't have lethal on that next turn, so I just needed to turtle as best as possible. And essentially, because he was curving so well, he could have beat me if he knew how Charleston works. Earlier on in this video, I talked about how you can't use the dong that you get off of Charleston immediately for your leader effect just due to the fact that the sequence of events happens during a battle. But the opponent didn't know how this worked. He assumed that Charleston was just a flat-out 2-cost plus 10,000 attack. So instead of just dumping all of the dong that he has onto that Law Beppo and swinging for game, he spread out his dong among his characters and hit for smaller attacks. And these smaller attacks that were 9k power, 8k power, which to be fair, relatively for Mihawk, these are small attacks. It gave me the time to be able to use Charleston and therefore have enough counter to be able to defend that turn. Because he wasn't able to close out the game on that turn, I was just able to simply push back because his leader was now back to 5,000 power. We have this term in Japan called shoken goroshi, which is essentially essentially just beating people because they don't know how your deck works, and this is exactly what I was relying on in this scenario. The opponent didn't know how Charleston interacted with my leader effect and therefore ended up losing because of it, but that's exactly kind of what we're hoping for. Red Green Luffy may not be a top tier deck, but with the opponent's mistakes factored into it, it ends up winning a lot more than the actual strength would reflect. Now going into the 4th round with only 4 people who are undefeated left within this tournament, I went against Lim. Next to me is Green Mihawk and Red Blue Ace, and I fought against Lim. It was so absurd that I actually took a picture and sent it to my friends. But this matchup, I feel like this is probably a very favored matchup for Green Purple Luffy, but the fact that I went second, he was able to find the 5-cost Sable, as well as the 3-cost Lim into the 5-cost Mihawk, and just curved exceptionally well, pulling out all the cards that he needed. Just put so much pressure on me that I wasn't able to leave up enough Dong for my leader effect because I haven't been able to set up the cards that actually give me back Dong at the end of my turn. However, despite this, I was still almost able to win due to the fact that I just had so much counter from my leader effect. Though he was hitting me at 6 or 7k every single turn over and over again, because of my leader effect, I was able to survive for quite a long time relative to most decks. And the one thing that would have made a difference is if I had drawn a single Charleston in that entire game. Fortunately, because I didn't draw any Charlestones, I lost by exactly 5,000 counter, which with Charleston would have meant that I would have had enough. So quite unfortunate where he was able to find the cards that he needed and I didn't find exactly the cards that I needed, but this does happen, of course. Even with the amount of searches within this deck, you can't actually search Charleston, unfortunately, so it's one of those things that we just have to accept and move on from. But anyways, the final match, I went against another Mihawk, a little bit shaken from how close that last Mihawk game was, just due to the fact that that 5-cost Currect was stopping so much of my aggression. But the person that I went against, well, he missed 7-cost Shanks, and if you miss 7-cost Shanks, instead just play your second Tashigi and pass, I'm gonna take that game every single time. I swarmed my board with things like the 5-cost Sanji, the 6-cost Luffy, just kept hitting him over and over and over again. He just had no cards to be able to defend against them. Ended up losing very, very quickly with 8 cards in his hand because so many of them were counterless. Like the reverse of the Lim game, I had exactly the cards that I needed and he just simply couldn't find the cards that he needed, meaning that this last game was the easiest of my day, giving me a little bit of a free victory lap for making it this far with Red Green Luffy. Still, despite this, I was only able to go 4-1, meaning that I wasn't able to get the winner prize, but I was still able to bring home the prize card, which is more than you can ask for when you're playing these kinds of cope decks. Still, with that all being said now, camera took a little out of focus. Let's talk about the changes that I would make to this deck now that I've played a little bit more. Now I have 3 main takeaways from this deck, and that is that playing a 6-cost Luffy as well as a 4-cost is exceptionally powerful on the same turn when you have 10 Dong. The main issue with this, however, is that you don't have the Dong left over to put onto your leader, meaning that you're forcing your turn to be a lot weaker just so you can have that 1 Dong to attach onto your leader. To solve this, I think that something like the 1-cost Nami could be extremely good. Although it's not searchable off of the 1-cost Nami searcher, it is searchable off of Sabawari, and I think that this card being able to give you 1000 power on an attack every single turn from the turn that it's played, essentially with how little removal is in the game right now, as well as being able to activate your leader effect, is just so powerful right now. So the main thing that I would really want to add to this deck is that card, because there are so many timings where I really want to do the 4-cost Luffy into the 4-cost Nami and play something like another 4-cost Nami or 4-cost Usopp just to be able to spread my board, deal with the opponent's board, and set up blockers. Really, the 4-cost Nami sets up so much potential. So I think that something like the 1-cost Nami could really help you capitalize on this. Another card that I wish I had was more 2Ks. Now, it's not like I actually needed that many 2Ks, but I just had some timings where I wanted to counter a little bit more than I actually had Dong up for. So I think just having maybe 2 to 3 more 2Ks in the deck, going up to 5 to 6 in total, could be very, very nice for this deck. The last card that I want to talk about is actually a card that I once again saw ricmasterflash using, so big shout out to him, and that's actually Gum Gum UFO. Specifically in my version of the list that runs the 1-cost Phoebe that can search Straw Hat 2 costs or higher, this card is actually searchable in the deck. And I realized that when I was playing this game, a lot of the times I'd be reliant on trying to top deck Roundtable. And though Roundtable is searchable off the 1-cost Scarp, it's not searchable off the other cards. So just having another way of reducing the opponent's power, I think could be really nice. And also, just simply having a cheaper Roundtable with Gum Gum UFO being 2 costs, I think is really nice as well. So though you probably don't have enough space to really comfortably put this card in, if you do have the space, I think it'd be really nice, especially in this version that runs the 1-cost Vivi. With that all being said, this is the list that I would run now. But of course, this isn't definitive because I still don't have as many games on Red Green Luffy as some other people do. Still, now let's talk about something exciting, and that's how this deck is going to change for EV04 players. Now this is more specific to Southeast Asian players or the few Japanese players that watch my videos, but EV04 has brought a couple of significant cards to the deck. This 1-cost Vivi card, while very good, only searches 2-cost or higher cards, meaning that it can't search the 1-cost Nami, nor can it search things like Dead Man's Game. But a card that can is the 1-cost Bonnie. This 1-cost Bonnie is basically just a strict upgrade from the 1-cost Vivi in this deck, as it not only has access to other searchers to just be able to roll through some searchers if you really need to find specific cards, but also being able to access things like Dead Man's Game is just really, really nice in this deck. So this is going to be the first and biggest change to the deck, and it's also very easy to put in. The second card that I think could be really good in this deck is the 7-cost Zoro. Now, obviously, this card is a little bit overstated in general, so just putting this into any red deck is probably going to be a good idea. But specifically in this leader, because you get so much Dong that can be used as counter from the characters that you play, just having a Dong on your leader, making your leader 7,000 power and having something like 3 to 4 Dong open is so hard to get rid of. And the card being a 7-cost 9,000 as well can really help you solve some of these mid-game awkward turns where you have a lot of counter in your hand but you don't really have that many cards to really play onto the board except for some random 4-costs. Just being able to slam down a 7-cost 9,000 that could potentially hit on the turn that it's played down just gives you so much tempo in the game and can really help you not only push the opponent down with this big body, but also survive thanks to the fact that it makes your leader 7,000 power. Still, this list is very tight, so this is what I would run for EV04 for my Eastern audience, but in general I think this deck is very solid, and if anything, it's just a lot of fun. And in a meta where almost anything goes, I feel like just bringing a fun deck that does relatively good into a lot of the meta decks is good enough. And for me, I mean, I didn't bring an optimized list, I didn't have that many reps on the deck, I just brought it with vibes and it ended up working out. So for you who's struggling to pick a deck, just pick what you like, I guess. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.